Just him. I want him only. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started for our afternoon session. Sergio Gio, the general manager for DoubleTree, has a nice surprise for us, so he wanted just a few moments as we resume this afternoon. Wow, look at the staff. So, Sergio, we'll give you the platform here in a few minutes, and thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Hey, John, thank you.
Look at all that.
Well, first, thank you guys for staying with us. We are so happy you are all here and back again. I had the chance to meet John and Megan and Aaron the other day in the pre-planning session, and I will tell you, our group of people that you see walking in here loves this group that's in front of us right now, and we are so happy you guys are here with us today. But we wanted to just take a quick little minute. You guys might have seen some of these people cleaning your rooms, serving you food, checking you in at the front desk, but we all just wanted to say thank you. I don't think enough in our world right now do we say thank you enough to what you guys bring as first responders in honor of 9/11 on the 18th anniversary. It is so special to us to be able to host you guys. So thank you from our staff to you. We are happy you're here.
That's very moving.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
It's the first. 30 years I don't see it done before. First time out. To the staff, thank you very much for doing this, and we thank you for all that you're doing for us. But thank you for taking the time out to come in and be a part of our conference. So I'll go ahead and begin with the introduction. Our next speaker is Daniel Herr, and he's the Deputy Commissioner, Virginia Department of Behavior and Health and Development Services. Now, his bio is quite lengthy, and he has told me not to read that. He says he just lets you know that he's been doing this longer than he wants to announce and let you know that he's been doing this. But when you look at the title, it says Sheriffs and Mental Health Issues. So I'm not sure where he's going with this. But however, Daniel, thank you for coming to our conference, and we look forward to hearing you. What you have for us this afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I thought the title was rather dangerous myself, so hopefully I will stay away from that, particularly given you're such an accomplished and well-armed audience. I will be cautious with my comments. Here? You can see I'm technologically challenged here. So when I thought about coming to talk with you today, it took me back to when I started my career as a social worker for a community services board in a very rural community. And one of my first recollections was actually the local sheriff locking me in a drunk tank so I could evaluate the individual in the adjacent drunk tank. So I have seen many parts of the system and have worked in partnership with law enforcement, I think, in every role that I've had over the last 40 years. My interest in talking with you would be to make this as relevant to what you do as possible, and recognize that what I'm bringing here on behalf of Acting Commissioner Mira Signer and the department is fairly high level, but would really like for you to ask any questions as we go along, kind of looking at the technology there, but would welcome you interrupting me at any point, asking for additional information or clarification as we go. And let's see, there is a clock here, so I will be mindful of the time in courtesy to those who come after me. So what I was going to suggest is that we start by just taking a little look at what Virginia has done in terms of how it allocates its dollars for behavioral health funding. In particular, some of the more recent initiatives to invest in community services. Talk a little bit about the efforts around opioid addiction, and then maybe segue, not so smoothly, but to talk about the state hospital census, temporary detention orders, which I know have a significant impact for you and your workforce, and then maybe end in talking about some of the efforts to develop some standards for healthcare in jails, in the local jails. So think about that as topics, and if you want me to address other things, please let me know as I go along. So one of the core challenges, I think, for Virginia and all of us who care about the citizens that we work with is, how do we spend the money that's given to us? One of the unique things about Virginia, following the enactment of the last resort legislation, which was certainly very well intended to make sure that everyone who needs a hospital is able to access that hospital, it altered some of the fundamental dynamics of how business is done. And Virginia spends about 50% of its dollars on state-operated facilities and 50% on community services. When you look at the rest of the nation, we are where the rest of the nation was in about the early 90s. Now most states invest 75% in the community and only 25% in institutions. So if the commitment is for individuals to be served in their home community to get what they need at the time they need it and in the right amount that they need it, that really is one of our core challenges. Thinking about that challenge then, one of the things that DBHDS is embarking on with the rest of its partners is conducting for the first time in Virginia a comprehensive needs assessment that looks at what each community's behavioral health needs are, and by that I mean both mental health and substance abuse, because those of you who may come from the southwestern part of Virginia where your needs are different than, for example, in Fairfax County where I lived for a point in time. So taking a look at those needs, surveying the services and resources that are there for those needs, and then making recommendations about how funding and services should be built out over time. One of the core challenges, if you've listened to some of the conversations in the General Assembly, is that Virginia has not had a real precise way of going about allocating dollars when they come. And part of what this needs assessment would look at and develop is, what things should you take into account when you give dollars to a community? It can't just be the number of folks that live there. It can't just be the tax base, but it has to look more broadly at the kinds of things that determine people's health in general and behavioral health in particular. So I don't know how many of you have heard the term STEP Virginia, or System Transformation Excellence and Performance. But this is actually now about a 4-year-old initiative that began when Virginia received some federal dollars to do some planning, and the focus of that planning was to really ensure that no matter where you lived in Virginia, there would be a floor of services, behavioral health services, that you, your family, or your neighbors could access. And Virginia has often funded very creative and innovative projects, but it has rarely funded them throughout every part of Virginia. And that's really what made STEP Virginia different from the things that we had done before. These services, we call them the 9 core services, are actually in the code of Virginia as mandatory services, with the expectation at this point in time that the build-out of those services be completed by July 1, 2021. Thus far, as you will see on the slide, about 5 of those services have been, there's been some investment to build them out. Just briefly, same-day access means that when you walk into a community service board, you are assessed and evaluated that day rather than being asked to wait and come back another day. The goal would be is that, for example, if I needed outpatient counseling, that I would be able to access that within 10 business days rather than being placed on a waiting list, as what has happened frequently in the past. The primary care screening takes into account the fact that people with serious and persistent mental illness who disproportionately find themselves in your jails as well have a 20-year a life expectancy that's limited by 25 years compared to the average person. And so this is really focused on identifying their primary health care needs early on. Crisis services is in the process of being invested in, with the goal of there being mobile services that would be able to assess the person where they are, rather than what is the fairly standard process of bringing them to the hospital emergency department where they're assessed and evaluated. And the last step for which there have been dollars is really outpatient services, so that folks who need that don't have to wait because of insufficient funding or staffing. Perhaps a little bit more abstract, on the next slide is the focus of building out a consistent continuum of Medicaid services. So we call it the state plan option, which is supported by the federal government, and they provide matching dollars for that. But Virginia's continuum of behavioral health services through Medicaid has been relatively limited, and this is a large effort with multiple stakeholders to work on designing a full continuum so that folks could get what they need to stay well, that if there are crises, that they have an adequate array of crisis services, that if they need inpatient hospitalization, that they have services that would allow them to step down from the hospitalization as quickly as possible. And for those individuals with the most serious forms of mental illness, that every one of them would have access, if needed, to what we call a program of assertive community treatment, or some of you may have heard of as PACT, which is a comprehensive, a multidisciplinary team of individuals who are able to go to that person's home and support and stabilize them there. And once again, would just reiterate, would welcome you asking any questions if you have an interest in doing so, so please don't hesitate to interrupt me. Was going to talk next very briefly about some of the initiatives for opioids. Don't know if you are aware that we initially received almost $10 million really of one-time funds over 2 years to start Virginia's targeted response for addressing both the prevention of addiction, the treatment of addiction when it occurs, and to set up recovery systems to support people who are living with addiction in the community. Following that, we received another $15 million over a 3-year period to support the same efforts. The challenge, of course, with one-time dollars is many of these individuals require ongoing care and support services, and the reimbursement for those services is frequently insufficient to meet the cost. So part of the challenge is for Virginia to develop programs and models of sustainability to continue this after the federal dollars go away. Thought I would walk through with you just a few examples of the initiatives. So in the far southwest, there was a program that was started for women who had infants or babies with a neonatal abstinence syndrome. So they had peers who would come out to their homes and support them in maintaining their sobriety and caring for their children. In Henrico, started an a jail opioid diversion program following multiple deaths of individuals who were released from jail on bond, and So understandably, the court system there had been reluctant to release people on bond or bail who were at risk for the same kinds of things. So this really started medication-assisted treatment in jail, linked the individuals with other folks who had lived experience with addiction and followed them out into the community. It supported 5 medication-assisted treatment programs in the Department of Corrections, furthered the development of over 35 community-based coalitions, which served probably about 370 to 380 individuals since those programs were started. A major focus of this is really helping folks in recovery with addiction reach out and help other individuals. So with the peer recovery programs are now in 90% of the community service boards, have probably connected with over 3,000 individuals with addiction since that time. Although there's been some controversy around this, the funds have supported the development and distribution of over 10,000 naloxone kits to help support someone who is at risk or actively in the process of overdosing. It's established programs in local and community colleges. There is now a peer-run warm line in each region that makes that connections with individuals when they are reaching out for help. And over 30 hospital emergency departments have peers there who work with individuals who've shown up in crisis related to overdose or addiction. I mentioned briefly about the challenge of sustainability with one-time federal dollars, and the Virginia General Assembly has given us, DBHDS, $5 million of ongoing general funds to support medication-assisted treatment that is really focused on individuals involved with the criminal justice system, so those who are in jails, prisons, on probation or parole, and has asked us to make sure that those programs include the injectable medication called Vivitrol, which helps with relapse prevention. The community service boards that you work with are in the process of applying for those dollars and are basically submitting proposals for the award of those funds. The blocks below really kind of give you some sense of the various ways in which the dollars can be used. It can be outreach programs that attempts to identify and engage the individuals who are at risk, building up the workforce, given the specialty nature of skills that are needed in terms of training and ongoing education for providing these services, paying for staff, helping with the assessment of individuals, and ultimately investing in the sustainability of the programs that are there. This is just my personal soapbox, but I think one of the things that we at times overlook in our conversations about opioid addiction is that those who are living with opioid addiction are frequently struggling with other addictions as well, and they need a full and comprehensive array of services, and I just ask for us to keep that in mind as we think and work on these issues. Was going to jump next and talk with you a little bit about what we, at least at DBHDS, describe as the census crisis for the state hospital system. Thought I would just make sure that we have a little bit of a shared understanding about the array of inpatient services that are out there. There are over 43 private psychiatric hospitals, or I should correct that and say there are over 43 psychiatric units around Virginia. A small number of them are freestanding psychiatric hospitals, and most of them are located in medical hospitals. They operate about 1,500 beds. If you compare that to the hospitals operated by DBHDS, there are 9 of those hospitals operating also about 1,500 beds, 1,491 to be exact. Virginia historically has primarily provided care for individuals, that state hospitals have primarily served individuals with criminal justice involvement and those with longer-term care needs. Following the enactment of the last resort legislation, that's changed dramatically, where now the role of the state hospitals is serving about 70% of individuals under a civil temporary detention order who have short-term acute care needs. suspect that many of you know this, but this is just a picture of, or a map of where the state hospitals are located. Suspect that many of you and your staff have visited the majority of them at some point in time, given the realities of you crisscrossing the state on a daily basis. One of the things that the General Assembly has asked us to address this year, in conjunction with our stakeholders, along with Mr. Jones here, is to take a look at the last resort legislation and consider if there's some things that we could do to change some of the trajectories I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But overall, and I don't know if this is a surprise to you or not, but the number of civil temporary detention orders that are issued every year has remained relatively flat. I just got the fiscal year 19 data earlier this morning, so it's not on this slide, but it's been an average of about 25,500 every year. The same for fiscal year 19. The private hospital's role has been declining about 2% every year in serving those individuals. That's also true for the last year, thus resulting in the threefold increase in the number of admissions to the state hospitals. What has created some of their unique pressures is, first of all, they were not designed to provide that type of acute care. And secondarily, following the death of Jamichael Mitchell and some of the code changes, the DBHDS hospitals are now admitting twice as many individuals with criminal justice involvement, so the census pressures are really coming from both ends. What that has meant is now we're using about 30 more beds every year, and quite frankly have run out of sufficient bed space. Some of you have been involved and were aware of some of the holidays when individuals regrettably waited in the hospital emergency department until there was enough space in the state hospitals. In response to our obvious obligation to provide care to the individuals that we're responsible for, and as a result of the growth in the state hospital beds, which is about 30 additional beds every year, we have sought and obtained permission to add 28 beds at Catawba Hospital, just outside of Roanoke, and if approved, we'll add another 28 beds next year to absorb that growth. In the meantime, as I mentioned kind of in passing, the General Assembly has asked us to work with our stakeholders to look at some ways to slow the trend of admissions into state hospitals, support the private hospitals in resuming a role that they've had in the past. This is a topic that generates many opinions, if not heat and controversy, and Mr. Jones can always be the truth teller and correct me here. But some of the things the stakeholder work group was asked to look at is to consider extending the 8-hour emergency custody period. Certainly those of you in this room know full well what that means, the impact for you and your workforce. Conversations about whether that would apply to everyone or just special populations such as those who are medically complex or individuals who are intoxicated. And I just need to say those are all conversations with the stakeholders providing us with written feedback to each one of these discussions. Taking a look at the security requirements to see if there would be an increased role for the private hospitals to have when someone is in their emergency department during the ECO period or even during the TDO period when there are delays in transport or exchange of custody. How could we support the private hospitals in having a more robust role? Are there ways for us to divert individuals from hospitalization and treat them in their home community, with the big focus being on what community services would we need to build out to do that? It looks like I have just a few more minutes of time if the clock here is correct, so I'm going to move on to something that I presume has some of your attention as well. Do you mind if I ask how many of you have had a role or been in part of any conversations about standards for jail-based health care? Okay, well, Mr. Jones told me that you had lunch and ate ice cream, so that you would probably all be snoozing, so I'm not surprised. And then you're subjected to me, so. But as many of you know, that individuals with serious mental illness are more likely to end up in jail than the average individual. And while the middle bullet that talks about almost 20% of individuals in the general population either having a clear diagnosis of mental illness or being suspected, that was a self-report, but that's not inconsistent with what we find nationwide. And what we know is that individuals of color and individuals with behavioral health needs are much more likely to end up incarcerated and for longer periods of time. And so given some of the tragedies in Virginia, the focus really was how could we develop a standard of care. And even I know that the Virginia Board of Corrections does require the local and regional jails to adhere to the life, health, and safety standards, and 11 of them already relate to individuals with behavioral health needs. Both the members of the General Assembly, the executive branch, and others have been very interested in the last 3 years in developing standards that would be unique to Virginia and meet its needs. So a report was given to the General Assembly last year, and this year they passed, the most recent year, they've introduced 3 bills which directed DBHDS to work with the Board of Corrections to develop those standards. And the standards were really adapted from the national ones, the National Commission on Correctional Health Care. And the work group is now partnering with each of the local and regional jails to get an assessment of where they stand with respect to the draft standards and what the costs might be to bring them into compliance with those standards should they be adopted and enacted. And part of what we will need to do together with our partners is then develop an estimate of that cost so the General Assembly can decide how it would like to respond to these recommendations. So that really covers the waterfront in terms of what I had identified as having a conversation about with you. Are there other things or questions or comments that you would like to give to me? Well, thank you very much for inviting us here today. I know that later on tomorrow, we will have some of our staff will have a conversation with you about alternative transportation, so I won't steal their thunder. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. We've met, or have had phone conversations before. I'm Stacy Kincaid. So I think most recently over the holiday, July 4th, when there was an issue concerning bed space. So again, thank you for your assistance then. I do have a question regarding Senate Bill 1488 on the TDO work group also focus on a unified standard of medical unified standard for medical clearance, because that's something that truly holds us up. And while we understand that, again, time is of the essence, oftentimes my deputies and or the police officers spend too much time in an emergency room waiting just for that. So if that's something that they could think about incorporating into that Senate bill, or perhaps maybe a different approach to get medical clearances completed.
So that was not a specific mention in the bill that's already passed. What I would say that there was this ongoing collaborative effort with the community service boards, private hospitals, and DBHDS to establish some standards, agreed upon standards for medical screening. We now meet on a monthly basis to review some of the pressure points around that, and it strikes me that we do not have any law enforcement representation on those conversations. Mm-hmm. So that might be a place for input, as well as I think, Mr. Jones, as you're providing feedback to DBHDS, that may be something that you would want to identify in your feedback to us, even though it's not expressly included in the legislation.
There could potentially, though, be an amendment to it, maybe. Wishful thinking. Well, just throwing that out there.
This is not necessarily my area of expertise. This was for a request for a one-time study, but it will include all of the stakeholder input and recommendations, and this will be deliberated by the General Assembly in the upcoming session.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel, thank you very much. I do appreciate you being here today. Yeah, next on the program is Jacob Lambert. Jacob Lambert, are you in the room? Here we are. Come right on up, Jacob, while I talk about you. Jacob serves as a traffic safety resource prosecutor for the Commonwealth Attorney Services Council. Jacob began his legal career as an assistant public defender in the city of Hampton, followed by serving as assistant Commonwealth attorney for the county of York and the city of Pocazon. Jacob then spent a short time in private practice before becoming Virginia's first full-time traffic safety resource prosecutor. Jacob received his Juris Doctorate from the Stetson University of Law of Gulfport, Florida, and his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Virginia Tech. So, Jacob, we appreciate you coming today and welcome to the podium.
All right, good afternoon. How's everyone doing? All right, I know that you guys had some lunch and it's getting late in the afternoon, so I'll keep it quick. And I just wanted to come and talk to you about some of the services that we offer at CASC. As was mentioned, I am the Traffic Safety Resource Prosecutor and work for the Commonwealth Attorney Services Council. So a lot of you might not know what that is, and so that's what I'm here to tell you about. Go back a little bit. This is my personal contact information. The number is my cell phone number. So that is the number for the phone that the DMV provides me, and I will answer it usually any time that you call. If it's during the nighttime or the evening hours, there might be some slight delay, but that's also my email address where you can reach me. So first go over what is CASC. You can read, so I'm not going to read verbatim the PowerPoint slides, but really what you need to know is that we help train prosecutors and law enforcement officers. And since I'm the TSRP, I'm specifically interested in those issues related to traffic safety, but as I'll talk about later on in the presentation, we do a number of programs on different topics that are relevant to both law enforcement and prosecutors throughout the Commonwealth. We have 2 grant-funded attorneys. My position is grant-funded by the DMV. We have a VSTOP grant attorney as well who handles the domestic violence, and we have 3 other attorneys that work on general issues, including our director, who's also an attorney. So what is the TSRP? This is sort of a newer position in the Commonwealth of Virginia in that there has never been a full-time TSRP before. I am the first full-time TSRP. It was previously filled by 2 different people who had part-time jobs doing the issues of traffic safety. And so as you can see, anything from your basic reckless driving, your driving suspended, all the way up to DUI manslaughter is what I focus on, and that is my sole focus as the TSRP, so that is what I spend every day researching and getting involved with. So, if you have questions about cases, about case law, about specific legislation that's been passed or is upcoming, that is what I'm here for, and you can call me and I will do my best to answer the question, or I will know how to find the answer to the question that you have. As you can see on there, and what is really important is I do not give official legal positions. I do not represent any specific agency. So as far as the DMV is concerned, the Commonwealth of Virginia, I do not speak for any of those agencies or speak for the Commonwealth. What I can be is a resource. And if it's black and white, if the question is what's the legal limit for alcohol for driving under the influence, I can tell you it's 0.08. That's not a legal opinion, that's a fact. But anything that is more than that, if you're having a healthy conversation with your Commonwealth's Attorney's Office or a different agency about maybe a disagreement, I can help be a voice that comes in there, but I cannot give an official legal opinion on any issue. I also work with a lot of federal agencies, NHTSA and the National Traffic Law Center. We work very closely together. I have a lot of contacts there, so if there are any questions that can be answered by them, I can help you out with that as well. So we really push our trainings, and we have a lot of benefits that a lot of other organizations don't have. First of all is that a lot of our trainings, not all of them, but a lot involve prosecutors and law enforcement officers. So it's a collaborative effort to bring them together, to bring you with your assistant Commonwealth's attorneys or who else you work with to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all work together for the common goal. We have experienced prosecutors and law enforcement officers that are on our faculty. Our faculty is comprised of people who are doing it day in and day out. They are a volunteer basis, so they don't get paid to be faculty. They just give up their time to come to our programs. We have people that are actively engaged in prosecution and actively engaged in law enforcement who teach our courses. We do offer PIC credits through DCJS, so any of your deputies that come to our training programs, they can apply for those credits and they will get those. I think what's most important and what's probably the biggest draw for y'all is that we cover the cost of lodging if the training is more than 1 day and if your office is 25 miles or more from the training location. We also cover meals, snack breaks, and we provide written materials. So that's one of our biggest benefits is that for lodging and meals and those types of things, there's no cost to your agency to attend our trainings. We have a number of specific traffic safety trainings. One is advanced DUI for prosecutors and law enforcement. There's also the DUID course for prosecutors and law enforcement, and we also have our course which is called Rolling Stoned, which is DRE for prosecutors. The advanced DUI program next year, it will be held in February and August. It's usually that last full week of February and then the second week of August. It's a 3.5-day training, and it focuses on all issues related to DUI. And it does not focus on DUID because we have a separate training for that, but anything from your constitutional issues to stops, to checkpoints, blood testing, all that kind of stuff. So usually in Williamsburg in the past, it's been held at the Great Wolf Lodge, which is a big draw for people if you've never been there. And we also have it in Stanton. Last time it was held at the Stonewall Jackson Hotel. If you've never been to the city of Stanton, it's beautiful. There's great things to do there. So we try to put our trainings in places that are a draw as well. We're still working on the 2020 dates. I've been in touch with our faculty to make sure that the dates that are proposed work for them. I haven't heard back from all of them yet, so I'm not going to announce the dates in case they have to change. We also have investigating and prosecuting DUIDs. This is a 1-day training, which is nice because it only takes your people off of the road or from your office for 1 day. And it's offered 6 times throughout the Commonwealth. We just had our most recent training in Nokesville, Virginia. We have we have Newport News. Last year we had Richmond, we had Winchester. So we try to cover a lot of areas in the state so that you guys have an opportunity to send your people to that training. That is a very intensive 1-day training, a lot of talk about drugs and their effects on the body, so I would recommend that your deputies get a good night's sleep before coming to that program because there's a lot of information that's thrown at them in 1 day. And those dates will also be available on our website probably within the next couple of months for the 2020 training sessions. What I think is very helpful for deputies in this scenario is that we also have the Department of Forensic Science, a DFS toxicologist comes out and presents at the training as well. So that's very helpful for our prosecutors and our law enforcement to kind of get their perspective of a DUID case. This is on here. It's not a law enforcement training, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of it. It is our DRE for prosecutors training. It is a 2-day training, and who in here is familiar with the DRE program and what that is? All right, not a whole lot of people. I'll talk about specifically a little bit later on what a DRE is and what that can add to your office as if you have road deputies. But basically it helps with the training for a prosecutor to prosecute a case involving a DRE. So we'll get to that in just a second. I wanted to spend a little bit of time. You guys are probably very familiar with some of these things, but I wanted to touch just briefly on some of the non-CASE trainings that I would recommend for your deputies if they are on the road and actively investigating and doing DUI stops and those types of things. The first is SFST, Standard Field Sobriety Test. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through SFST and that training because you guys probably know that. I just wanted to pull one nugget from the SFST training manual just to leave with you when you're training your deputies and talking to them about the field sobriety test. Basically what this is saying is that even if you don't do the test 100% correctly, it does not necessarily make them invalid. So obviously we want to be teaching, and in classes we want our deputies to learn what the SFSTs are and how to do them properly, but just for their confidence level, do not be concerned if you mess up one thing, you have them do 8 steps instead of 9 steps, something like that. So that does not make the test invalid. It can still be used in court, and it can still lead to a conviction for somebody who's driving under the influence. The next I'll talk about is ARIDE, the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement. That is a course that is offered through the DMV. It's kind of the gateway between your regular SFST DUI enforcement to your DRE, which is the more advanced drug driving course and certification. What's important about this is to further assist in the deputies identifying and articulating the signs of impaired driving by drugs. Certainly something that is on the rise and something that needs to be dealt with, especially given the opioid crisis and other things that are going on with marijuana and where that's maybe headed, who knows, but important to know and be able to detect drug driving. The ARIDE course is also open to prosecutors and law enforcement. What is most important is that you have to perfectly do the SFSTs on the first day of the training or you will be kicked out. So make sure that if you're sending your deputies to this program that they are proficient in SFSTs. This is a program not for your green deputy that's right out of the academy who's doing DUI enforcement. It's probably for a mid-level deputy who has some experience and is going to be able to do those SFSTs. It's also not a DRE course. And there's no registration fees. The registration fees are covered by the Virginia Highway Safety Office. DRE, Drug Recognition Expert, is a program that was developed by NHTSA and IACP, and it's just the same people that developed the SFSTs developed this program. It is an intensive training. You have to have gone through ARIDE school to go to the DRE school. It is a very long and very cumbersome course, so just be aware of that. There are only about 30 certified DREs in the Commonwealth currently. That number may have changed in the last couple weeks, but around 30, and those dates will be released as well for 2020. The goals are similar to A-RIDE, although with the DRE, you're going to be able to certify that person as an expert in drug recognition in court. So that's what is important, is that during a DUI prosecution, you have, the road officer's general observations, you have what the toxicologist is testifying to, and the DRE is kind of there to bridge that gap between the science and the physical clues for the drug driving recognition. So that's definitely helpful for the court and helps with conviction on DUIDs, which I know a lot of officers and deputies and prosecutors, even mostly prosecutors, are scared to try a DUID case. So definitely having a DRE there is helpful for that. So sort of out of time, so I just wanted to get to the other training programs that we offer. We offer training program for law enforcement that has to do with internet crimes, cyber attacks, forensic analysis, and electronic records, how to get those, what to subpoena, who to subpoena, those types of things can be definitely helpful. Top Gun is our drug investigation course, which has a prosecutor and a law enforcement officer from the same jurisdiction team up so that they learn how to write search warrants, affidavits for search warrants, and constitutional issues with searches. Our Guns N' Roses program is the intimate partner violence. We have Gangbusters, which is actually going on right now at the Great Wolf Lodge, with investigation and prosecution of gang cases. Trauma to Trial, non-stranger sexual assault cases, Sound of Silence, which is child abuse investigation and prosecution, and Ring of Fire, which is new this year, which is our arson investigation and prosecution. So all of these programs have law enforcement and prosecutors teaming up to participate in that course, and so that's a good collaboration to go back to your jurisdiction and have the tools to work together. This is our website, Commonwealth Attorney Services Council, where you can find and register for all of these programs. You can also find contact information for myself and the other staff attorneys in the office. And so I would recommend that you visit that website, take a look around, and see if any of our trainings can be useful in your jurisdictions. So thank you for your time, and y'all be safe out there.
Jacob, thank you very much. Thank you, Jacob. Very, very, very informative. Now we have with us Ms. Shannon Dion. Certainly, we know her from past acquaintances, and for some of you who don't know, Ms. Dion was appointed by Governor Ralph Northam as the director of DCJS in January 2018, after serving as Department Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs since 2014. Shannon has dedicated her career to improving public safety in the city of Richmond and the Commonwealth, and she is a former prosecutor who worked for the city of Richmond and the Office of the Attorney General. So, Shannon, I welcome you to the platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sheriff Dempsey, for that warm welcome. Shannon Dion, so good to be here again with you. Thank you, John, for inviting me here. I have a lot of slides I want to get through. I think I've got 15 minutes, a little bit less than that. So I'm going to talk really fast, so I apologize in advance. So if there's anything you want to catch up about with me afterwards, I'm going to stick around for a little while, so please don't hesitate. All right, just in no particular order, just going to run through a little bit of what DCJS has got going on that may be of interest to you and may affect your world. The Virginia Beach response, those of you who might not know, we have a statewide crisis response coordinator who is tasked with responding to any type of regional or state emergency. I'm really, really proud of the work that our folks have been doing to help Virginia Beach, the city of Virginia Beach, respond to the shooting about 3 months ago. And we have coordinated a team of like 53 victim witness folks from all over the state who work in your Commonwealth Attorney's offices to respond to Virginia Beach and provide ongoing providing counseling to not only the victims and employees of Virginia Beach, but also the first responders and law enforcement. And we've put in over 1,700 man hours. Our grants team has been working with the federal government and getting grant money available to Virginia Beach in terms of helping with not only victims, but also with the law enforcement response. The last bullet there is the AFLIA grant that we were invited to apply, and we're going to be getting about $500,000 soon that can be used to help reimburse overtime for the law enforcement officer response. Not all of that money will be spent, but the feds have told us that we can keep it and kind of in reserve if there is another event like that that requires federal support. So very excited that we've got our folks on the ground working with you. And if you ever have a situation or want to learn more about this, we definitely want to get the word out because it is a really important part of a community's long-term recovery when something like this happens, and unfortunately those things are just going to continue to happen. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that this past budget cycle we were fortunate enough to get not only funding to help us roll out active shooter trainings for the communities, but we also were gifted with a full-time position. So now we have a dedicated employee in our office who is going to be setting up these trainings for your communities, your businesses, your schools. We got a small amount of money to do that, and it's a very, very strong priority, not only of Governor Northam's administration, but also our agency. We take being prepared for these types of emergencies very seriously. In fact, before the Virginia Beach shooting, we had already scheduled mandatory training for all of my staff to go through active shooter training, and we partnered with some officers who've been trained in the CRAZE model, and we tweaked it, and so now it's a 4-hour program that we put on. The first 2 hours are the civilian response to an event. How are you an immediate responder? And the second 2 hours was the critical care, because that seems to be the a new emerging best practice for individuals to be prepared for addressing wounds between those precious few minutes between the time an event happens and when first responders are able to come. So it was very well received. I will just tell you that just in our agency, that started getting people asking questions about, like, well, what should I do? Like, I don't have an office where I can close my door and barricade myself in. Like, I'm in an open cube. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond? And so it's been really, really amazing and wonderful to see, like, folks in my agency take this very seriously. And so we're just thrilled that we were kind of the test pilot for that, but now we're going to be rolling that out into your communities. And so I really will need your help, because we're going to be making this money available to train officers that you recommend to us that would be good instructors for your community, so that we will invest in them becoming CRAZE trainers, give them all the tools and resources that they need to then turn around and go out and teach your constituents how to be safe. So we'll be looking for your input on that. We know that a lot of officers will probably want to do this, but you know from your leadership perspective that there's folks that you think would be a good fit for this. So you will probably be hearing from Janice Cosell, who's our person coordinating all of this in the near future. Okay. Won't touch on this too much, but you probably have already heard me talk about school safety. We really hit a home run, I think, this past General Assembly session, and we're blessed to get so much more money into our Center for School and Campus Safety, which has been around for about 20 years. It's one of the longest standing school safety centers in a state. It was developed and created after Columbine, and a lot of other states joined the bandwagon, and sorry to say that many of those centers across the country no longer exist anymore, although now they seem to be kind of resurrecting, but now they're looking to us as a model for how to run a center which provides you, educators, teachers, with the resources that you need to keep our students safe. And so after many, many years of not having enough funding, they only gave us one person and up to $400,000 initially. And that's all we've had to work with for 20 years. And now we finally have millions of dollars to work with. So we've been able to hire 6 people, which means that we're going to be able to increase the amount of trainings that we offer to you and to your constituents. There is more money also put into the School Resource and School Security Officer grant program. So we're very excited about that. So lots of good things happening in school and center safety. quickly just want to touch about human trafficking. The Crime Commission looked into this subject. They're continuing to work on it, but we were able to get money to have one statewide response coordinator for sex trafficking, and we're going to kind of open it up, even though it's specifically for sex trafficking. That's just one type of trafficking. But now you have one person to go to if you've got trafficking going on in your communities. I highly encourage you to reach out to her. She just started about a month ago, and I will tell you, I feel like we found a unicorn in this person. I was looking for someone who had law enforcement experience, who had experience as an educator, because we know that many of the youngsters that are being trafficked are going to our schools. We need to be able to identify them and provide them wraparound services in order to get the folks that are taking advantage of them. And so she started a month ago. She is a former law enforcement officer from Florida. She worked in undercover capacity for many years doing John stings, and she's also a former elementary school teacher, and we stole her from Prince William County, where they had received a couple of years ago grant money from our agency to try a new project that helped educate all students in Prince William County about human trafficking and to help teachers and administrators identify potential victims of human trafficking and to work with them, identify them, provide them the services that they need to get them out of those situations. And it's been phenomenal. And she's the one that got that program up and running, and now she's available to the entire state. So clearly super excited about that. So please feel free to reach out to her if you have any human trafficking issues. Okay, the other, one of the other programs that may be of interest to you is, it's called FACT now. This used to be TIPS, but it's the Framework for Addiction Analysis and Community Transformation. And what that means is that we were given some grant money a couple years ago to try a pilot program where we were able to partner a private company that has all the data analytics capacity and was really interested in working with the criminal justice on a criminal justice issue. And so we targeted the Northern Shenandoah Valley area because they already had a very strong coalition up and running. They identified well before the rest of the state and the rest of the country that opioid was an issue and a crisis. And because they had all of those stakeholders talking to each other and sharing information, so they've got law enforcement, prosecutors, the service providers, the hospitals, the emergency responders, all of that data they were sharing with each other. But the problem was they didn't have a platform that kind of host all of that information and to turn it around into useful information for those folks. And so we hired Clarion. They're a company that's on state contract, and they have done a great job, such that now we're piloting a second location in the Roanoke area. The Deputy Commissioner Hers agency, Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, has about $1.6 million that they, and grant money that they are helping to fund the Roanoke project. And so we're really excited. And just to give you an example of what this data platform can do in Winchester area now, any one of those users can go on and see and look at trends, like where are the overdoses happening, what neighborhoods, what drugs, what time of day, what day of the week. And just to give you an example of like how they've been able to turn around and use that information, they noticed an uptick in overdoses like during the middle of the week, and they had, within a 72-hour period, they had 3 overdose deaths. And so they were quick. They put together a big press push and got the information out there, and all of a sudden, the overdoses dropped to 0. They were able to look at analytics and see that certain drugs were being used, and they're spiking in the middle of the week, and they could drill down and figure out, is it male, female, is the age of the people, and even look at the street level where these things were taking place, all in a matter of just like typing in a few things. So it's very, very cool, and if you have any interest in that, or if you're in one of those areas, I encourage you to reach out to the coalitions or to us, and we'll put you in touch with them. You probably might have talked about some of the body-worn camera issues, but again, that's an issue that's being studied by the policymakers. Secretary Brian Moran was tasked with convening a work group. That work is going on. I think you're probably aware that there was some interesting language in the budget bill about if you have more than 75 cameras being used, you have to be able to fund an extra prosecutor. So there's certainly some cost factors in there. So I won't go into this because Deputy Commissioner Hare already talked about that, about the work that's being done there, but we've got staff that are working on those work groups as well. Okay, this was one I confess I don't know a lot about, but apparently at the federal level, the feds had been considering, and I need to look at the clock. Almost done. Okay. There's a change in the law, and we're still figuring out whether there needs to be a corresponding change in legislation here in Virginia. Okay, I'm going to skip over this for the interest of time. T-Rex and ACE, I don't know if many of you know, but we had been working with a private vendor to update this. Vendor did not perform as up to our liking, so we had to divorce them. So right now, we are gathering as much information as we can. If you have any information you'd like for us to consider, please let us know, because now next steps are, do we need to outsource this again, or can we build this in-house? We've got a lot of different challenges, but it is a priority. It is a high priority for this agency, because I did not know this until recently, but we have been promising you a new system for at least a decade. The systems at T-Rex and ACE are legacy systems. They're access-based, a big no-no in terms of VITA. And I apologize, I'm going to steal a couple of minutes, if I can, just to talk about this, because this is really, really important. We are in the process of updating and reviewing the training standards for the next generation of law enforcement officers. This was something that hasn't been done in more than 20 years, and then we are forced to do it in a budget, with budget language. They didn't give us a lot of time, so we're still working with the General Assembly about that. But basically, the process is we've got these subject matter work groups that are sort of the hands-on street experts that are helping shape like what those new training standards should be. They are making recommendations to the Curriculum Review Committee, and that's something that's created in regulations. And the Curriculum Review Committee is made up of directors from independent and regional academies, and then they report to the Committee on Training, who ultimately blesses all of this. So Curriculum Review Committee meetings are public, so the public is invited. They happen pretty much every month. You see the dates on there. They're in Chesterfield County. But the reason I want to share this with you, in the next slide, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the two, is because when it comes time to actually presenting this to the world for review, I want to create a step in there where between here and there, which is like the more public notice of this, I really want to get you as leaders in law enforcement, your opinions on what this is, because everyone back here is subject matter experts, but they're not looking at some of these topics and issues from like your perspective, like from a legal risk perspective or policy or practice perspective. And I really want to make sure we get this right, because we're not going to do this for another 20 years. And there's some really neat things that are happening throughout the country when it comes to law enforcement training standards, and there's some new best practices that are being embraced out there. So this is really an opportunity for us to have a conversation and think about what it is that we want our next generation of law enforcement officers, how we want them to be trained, what subjects they need to be trained upon, because I'm sure you know that the next generation of folks they think differently from us. They learn things differently. They process things differently. So we really need to make sure that what we produce is a good product and will match their needs so that we can do it right. And then finally, there's some interest in having a master curriculum that we all share right now. 20 years ago, apparently, everyone wanted to do their own curriculum. I'm hearing that there's some interest in having a state curriculum that can be modified and massaged, if you will, for local needs. But if there's a will, then our agency is certainly willing to engage and take that on. I think one of the good things about having a master curriculum is that we assume some of the liability that some of the academies have in terms of pushing out training, and it can be real time, so that when there are updates in legal, when case law comes out, it's real time updated for you, and your officers are getting like the very best and very current training. So with that, you may hear from some of us. We've got a new requirement coming up from the feds. They're still trying to work out a lot of the kinks, but they're basically, they want to know who's dying in our custody, and as they figure out those kinks, we will keep you posted. But we are definitely going at this as we want to minimize impact to your agencies, and so I think that there's other information that's already out there that's collected by other state agencies. So if we can just draw from that and not bother you guys with it, that's what we're trying to do, because we certainly don't want to. This is an added burden for the state. We don't want to jeopardize the burn JAG money that comes in, but we will keep you posted and work with you on that. And finally, there's my contact information, and I have field visits at the top, because I will say 18 months in now to my job, I was like, sorry, I know I'm getting the stink eye here a little bit, but I'm sure if you recall, like when you first came into office, like you thought you were going to go in and do A, B, and C, and you get there and you kind of you realize, oh, this is like this is what's happening here, and the issues that I wanted to work on, not necessarily we've got to work on some other things like X, Y, and Z, and so that's what happened to me. And now that we've kind of gotten some of the in-house things straight and strong, I really want to get out in the field and talk to you and listen to you and really listen, because we at DCJS can't support you and be there for you, provide all the resources and trainings that you need unless we're actively listening and not assuming things. So please, I'd love to come visit you, come talk to you and your deputies. So please reach out to me. I'll be getting on the road soon. So I welcome those visits. Anytime you have any questions, please contact John, contact me. That's my office number. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Shannon. You did have a lot of information, and we're sorry we gave you such a narrow amount of time there to provide that, but hopefully we got some of it. But again, she makes the offer to come visit, phone calls, so we look forward to that. You know, throughout the entire conference, we've had some great speakers. We really have some great presentations, just as we just had one from Shannon. But this afternoon, we're really, really privileged to have with us Jill Harrington, and with her, she brought Dr. Jane Weiss. And y'all, please make your way to the platform. We'd appreciate that. You know, she's got an important message to share with us. She's a co-founder of an organization called Help Save the Next Girl. And the abduction and murder of her 20-year-old Morgan Dana Harrington, her daughter, in 2009 caused her mother, Jill, who is with us here today, to become a determined advocate against sexual violence. The Harringtons have developed their Help Save the Next Girl Foundation in 2011 to promote safety, awareness through education, victim outreach, legislative change. Jill received her BS degree in nursing from UVA, and the majority of her clinical practice has been with oncology patients. For the last 10 years, Jill has traveled through Orphan Medical Network International, Zambia, Africa, to care for her patients in remote tribal regions. The Morgan Harrington Educational Wing in Ndola, Africa, and the Morgan Dana Harrington Memorial Scholarship at Virginia Tech at Caroline School of Medicine in Roanoke, Virginia, were both created to honor Morgan and her desire to be an educator. Jill is married to Dr. Dan Harrington, the Vice Dean of the Virginia Tech Caroline School of Medicine, and to Harrington's surviving child, Alex, resides in Brooklyn, New York. Jill, we welcome you here today and welcome you to the platform.
Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here with you all and share a little bit of our story with you all today. Before I get started, I would like to recognize two dear friends. Sheriff Hank Parton was going to be here today, but developed some shoulder problem, maybe a replacement, which really worries me because the guy's pretty awesome already, and if he goes all bionic on us, watch out, world. I'd also like to thank Jane Vance, who is the Vice President of Help Save the Next Girl, because she was my co-pilot and made sure that I made it here today to meet with you all. This is a picture of our daughter, Morgan Dana Harrington. She was a beautiful girl, inside and out, just chock full of potential. Morgan went to attend a concert in Charlottesville, Virginia, on October 17th, 2009, and she never came home. An agonizing 101 days was the length of time that Morgan was missing until her body was found in a field in Albemarle County by a farmer who was checking his fences. Morgan's death irrevocably changed our family. We'd had a pretty happy existence until that point, and this murder left us in indescribable pain. It is true when they say that the death of a child is perhaps the worst agony that a parent can experience. So what do you do when your life is shattered? How do you survive? Our daughter was killed by a serial murderer. How could that be? Well, I believe that life delivers moments to all of us when we have to walk the talk. And that's the most basic tenet of my faith, is that God is in everything. And if God is in everything, goodness is in everything. Despite all appearances, I was convinced, even at the very beginning, that even the death of our daughter had some seeds of goodness that we could germinate and make something good eventuate from her short life. But to do that, you have to keep fear and doubt in check. You have to keep your thumb off the nozzle and let the blessings flow. And Morgan was a great blessing to us. But you know, her death has resulted in blessings of equal measure. But you have to stop dumping out the new things that are trying to show up, because you cling to what was and can never be again. You have to transform. Our life, yes, was shattered and broken, but you can take shards of a picture and reconfigure them so they become a mosaic. It's a different picture entirely, but it still is a picture that is capable of providing beauty and joy. Many victims' families choose to honor their murdered loved ones by creating positive legacy. This process brings much comfort. Our family chose to develop legacy for Morgan in 3 specific ways that really were meaningful, areas that had meaning to her during her short life. We've mentioned the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine scholarship. The summer before Morgan was murdered, she worked at the medical school with her papa, who was the vice dean. And it was a really remarkable time for all of us as a family. When you finally hit the milestone, when you can have an adult relationship with a child, it is so gratifying for a parent. You know, you never have a peer relationship with them, they're always your child, but to see them assuming an adult role so successfully validates your parenting. We knew we had done a good job with her when we saw how well she shone in that professional setting. And it had a big impact on her. Morgan was around a number of really inspired educators there and decided to declare a major in education at Virginia Tech. What I particularly like about the medical school scholarship, it has about $400,000 in it now and is awarded to 2 students every year on a need basis. But what is super cool about it is that in a direct result to our family's injury, we are sending healers back into our community. And that is a means of neutralizing evil, and I'm very proud of it. I've taken Morgan's positive legacy across the country and across the world, even to Africa, where I've worked for the last 16 years with Orphan Medical Network International, OMNI. And Morgan loved the stories of our medical mission trips and packed supplies with me and planned on traveling on a mission trip with me to Africa after her graduation from Virginia Tech. But she never made it there. And I want to share a little wobble. I am a very positive person, and I'm not given to self-pity. But I was in that space one day. I was seeing neighbors playing with grandbabies and planning their daughters' weddings, things that I would never do. And I said to myself, people are doing all these important life events, and all I've got is this box of ashes. And I felt sorry for myself until I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, and I remembered, ashes make cinder blocks. With cinder blocks you can build, and by golly, that's just what we did. I took a nice packet of Morgan's cremated ashes and mixed them in the foundation of the Morgan Harrington Educational Wing at Omni Village in Ndola, Africa. Morgan School is a beautiful school where hundreds of deserving young Zambians will be educated to become part of the enfranchised Africa of tomorrow. More children than Morgan would ever have taught if she had lived to adulthood are being educated in her honor. Here again is a way that we have found to neutralize evil. We started Help Save the Next Girl very spontaneously. Maybe 7 weeks or so after Morgan had been killed, Virginia State Police told me that they found Morgan's T-shirt, which was really the most identifiable piece of evidence in her case, draped on a bush on Rugby Road, which is the frat row area at UVA, where hundreds of people are there every day. And I said, well, you know, that you must tell the community. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. If we ever have an arrest, we want this information private for the trial. And I said, you must tell the community that he is here, he is bold, and he's kind of thumbing his nose at you by displaying this trophy. It's too late for Morgan, she's dead, but please, God, please help save the next girl. So how do you do that? How do you save the next girl if that is your endeavor? Again, it wasn't a well-thought-out business plan. It was really organic. We said, well, first let's focus on education. And we have chapters or clubs in schools, many here in our area, but really across the nation and across the world. We have more than 90 school-based chapters from elementary school to middle school, high school, and college. We've partnered with 6 law enforcement agencies as well. Young people gather together and learn techniques to protect themselves and their peers from predatory danger. Help Save the Next Girl, another branch of Help Save the Next Girl, is victim outreach, and that takes many different forms. I spend a lot of time in courtrooms attending trials with families whose children have been murdered, because I know up close and personal how distressing it can be to sit in a cold courtroom and listen to details of evidence that are so disturbing. I've spent a lot of money helping families pay for their daughters' funerals. I've helped some of those same families who are away from work and they're short on their bills because they're sitting days on days in courtrooms. We use the Help Save the Next Girl active social media platform to help missing families and help them get missing posters and solicit information online in a very rapid and widely disseminated way. I also, and remarkably to me, I never anticipated some of these different tasks that would come to hand. I've also been very active in legislative reform. To date, I have successfully lobbied the Virginia State General Assembly for 16 bills that have been passed into law. Familial DNA is one of them. Virginia was the 3rd state to use familial DNA forensically. Unfortunately, it did not help Morgan's case, but we know it may and hope that it will help in other cases. Safe transfer is another bill that I'm very pleased with. Safe transfer requires that if a student is expelled from a college or university for sexual misconduct or rape, the transcript will reflect that event. In our particular case, Jesse Matthew had raped girls at Liberty University, and he was sent on to Christopher Newport, where he did the same. That can't happen in Virginia anymore. You know, you talked about best practices. It's bad practice if you're an elementary school teacher to pass a 5th grader on to 6th grade who really can't read well, but to pass a sexual predator on to another institution of higher learning without giving them a heads up that he is in their midst is wrong and can't happen here any longer. We have a bill requiring external reporting of sexual assaults and rapes on college campuses. I'm really proud of the work I've done with Sheriff Chip Harding of Albemarle County. We have gotten 2 expansions of the DNA data bank passed, which would require DNA submission for some of the more egregious or violent misdemeanor convictions. And I'm really pleased to put these forensic tools in the hands of law enforcement here in the Commonwealth. And I also know that if any of those laws had been on the books in 2009, our daughter Morgan and Hannah Graham would both be alive because Jesse Matthews would have already been in jail. We have worked really diligently for 5 years. And finally, we unmasked Morgan's serial killer. I was told at the very beginning that it was likely Jesse Matthews would be identified from DNA on another body. And I understood logically that it may eventuate that way, but I was darn sure I was not going to sit back and wait. I was going to move heaven and earth to try and prevent that. So we've accomplished a great deal. What I want to share with you, let me backtrack a minute. We've accomplished a great deal, and indeed, Jesse Matthews was unmasked, pled guilty. He is currently serving 7 consecutive life sentences. How did we accomplish all of this? How did we create positive legacy? How did we find our daughter's killer? I think how we managed is because motive. Why am I telling this to law enforcement? You all know this. Motive and intention matters. I believe that motive and intention directly influences results. We have never been motivated by bitterness or hatred. I know that if our primary motive had been, get that bastard, we would not be the whole human beings that we are today, and we would have accomplished little. I think that's an important takeaway for law enforcement. You know, the service that we have done has helped us heal and has kept us whole. The service that you provide is important to your work and practice just as ours is. In fact, we created a bookmark that we distribute to schools with a quote on it that I love. I slept and dreamed that life was joy. I woke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service is joy. Please keep that service and that joy in your practice every day. I am not naive. If moral authority for retaliation and hatred were to be awarded to someone, I certainly deserve it. I've got the right to it. But I don't hate Jesse Matthews. I never have. For me, it's as if there was a raging bear in your neighborhood, rampaging and destroying things. You wouldn't hate the bear. It's just doing what bears do. And I believe that Jesse Matthews is different stuff than you and I. He is an apex predator. And all we needed to do, just like the bear, is have him stopped and caged so he couldn't hurt anyone else anymore. I have had the experience of holding my daughter's gap-toothed skull in my hands. I have also held the killer's mother in my hands, and I have blessed them both. And the ability to do both of those things at the same time has changed and created much growth in me, which is why I can say Morgan's death has resulted in blessings for our families. I would ask, or perhaps remind all of you, as I do usually when I speak, please Know your neighbors. Look out for one another. Participate in your community, because together we can help save the next girl. I so much appreciate your attention. Thank you so much. 241. God bless all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Most grateful to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Jill, certainly on behalf of the Virginia Sheriff's Association, please accept our condolences, but you're inspiring. So thank you for your message today. Thank you for being here and sharing with us, and know that when you leave here today, you have another partner, the Virginia Sheriff's Association. Whatever we can do to help and support your cause, we would love to do that.
Tell you one little thing. I have to confess this, prior to Morgan's murder, I really didn't know many law enforcement officers. I did have one parking ticket. I knew I was wrong, and that gentleman found me, but I didn't know any law enforcement officers on a first-name basis. I know many now. I've had many in my home. But I still remember that first guy, because I do remember his name too. His name was Sir. You all take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you again. May God bless you. Okay, we now have on our program an introduction to the dark web. Is Liam Bowers? Is he here? Okay, there he is. Come right on up, Liam. Liam is a former intelligence officer and counterintelligence special agent with the U.S. Army Special Operations, and served as a senior security advisor with Bose Allen Hamilton. Liam has worked extensively throughout the Arabian Peninsula and South Asia. In 2014, Liam founded Bluestone Analytics, and a veteran-owned cybersecurity company based in Charlottesville, Virginia. Liam and his team currently support a wide range of law enforcement and national security clients. Liam received a master's degree in political science with an emphasis in national security from West Virginia University. He also holds a certified ethical hacker and certified hacking and forensic investigative certifications. Liam, I certainly do not envy you following Ms. Jill Harrington, so please welcome to the microphone.
Well, thank you all for having me. At first, I'd like to recognize Mrs. Harrington. Thank you for sharing your story. So, when I was asked to come speak, I was asked to give an overview, a technical overview of the dark web. But I think what's probably important is to talk about the evil that we see every day working in this environment. As you mentioned, I came from the Army Special Operations community. I was really fortunate to spend most of my time working in Iraq and Afghanistan. I got kind of hurt, so I couldn't do that forever, and decided to take the private sector route. So I started Bluestone Analytics, based in Charlottesville, right on the downtown mall, and we specialize in finding evil on the dark web and passing it to people that can do something about it. Coming from the special operations community, our whole goal was to capture or kill people doing bad stuff around the world. That's what we live for. That's what I did for over a decade. So now my job is to enable those people that are still in the fight, that can do that. Our primary clients are FBI, DIA, CIA, NSA, and all the folks out in the world doing good stuff. That's who we like to support. So I'm going to skip over some of the technical stuff and get to the wins. If people have technical questions, feel free to ask at the end, or I'll hang around for about a half hour or so. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is cryptocurrency. The primary way that dark web threat actors pay for the horrible things they buy and sell is through an anonymous form of transfer called cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is the most popular method that is used. There are plenty of other very anonymous types of cryptocurrency, but one of the most effective ways that we have seen the FBI and the NSA track child predators, international terrorists, all of the bad folks that you can think of, is by tracking the way they pay for the goods and services on the dark web. And one of the ways that we've seen state and local law enforcement use it effectively is by using that as part of the seizure and returning that money to fund future law enforcement operations. We work very closely with the West Virginia State Police. They recently captured an individual in the southern part of the state of West Virginia that had both fentanyl in his possession and an incredibly large amount of child pornography. That person also had about $100,000 in Bitcoin on a thumb drive, and they just happened to plug that thumb drive into a forensics laptop, and were able to capture all that cryptocurrency and then use it to fund a very large expansion of the counter-opioid task force in southern West Virginia. So the things that we primarily see on the dark web: an incredibly large amount of violence. People do the worst things to other humans and then post those videos on the dark web. They often leave just enough of a digital trail that we can help the federal law enforcement community track that back to the individuals responsible. As you can imagine, there's lots of hacking. Drug sales is probably what actually fuels a lot of the commerce on the dark web. Fentanyl and the opioid crisis, just like you see it in the small communities in the state of Virginia, is highly prevalent on the dark web. Everything from user level or user quantity amounts of opioids to bulk shipments of 55-gallon drums full of fentanyl that you can buy straight from the dark web and have it delivered directly from China. We also see, probably the saddest thing we see is all the child and human trafficking. There are places on the dark web where you can essentially order, just like you'd order a pizza, you can order a child brought to your location. Often it's people that have been smuggled in from other countries. A lot of people get smuggled across the southern border, and then it funnels into the human trafficking networks here in the United States. All of that is freely available on the dark web, and as long as you know how to use the cryptocurrency and pay for it, it is very easy to gain access to those kinds of goods and services. I really want to focus on the wins that we've had. Most importantly, we have been able to stop about a half a dozen school shootings around the country. When people... The best example, and working with the FBI here in the state, we found the school shooting threat on the top there. It was a kid who posted just enough information on a Pastebin, which is a dark web type of forum, that allowed us to zero in on the school. So he posted the name of the school, he posted his age, he posted how much money he had, and he wanted to buy weapons with that money. And he posted the fact that he had been in mental health counseling in the past. So those things allowed the FBI to narrow down just enough to interview a handful of kids, and they found the kid that posted this. The worst, and a great example of how horrible the dark web is, the kid posted how much money he had, and instead of all the other users on the forum saying, hey, don't do this, go get help, they told the kid where on the dark web to go buy a weapon with the $200 that he had. So that's how horrible people are in this environment. They actively encourage violence as opposed to trying to step in and stop it. But working with the FBI, we got this in front of them. It was like the next day that they were able to arrest this kid. So we also recently worked with the FBI internationally, and we were able to stop a school shooting in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It was a white nationalist fueled threat, and they arrested 2 teenagers with weapons in Rio, and that was seen as a win for the U.S. Embassy in Rio de Janeiro. Just some other examples of things that we see, and This is by no means the only example of fentanyl on the dark web, but there are markets on the dark web that look very similar to Amazon. You can look at reviews of vendors, you can look at reviews of quality of cocaine and quality of heroin and all kinds of different stuff, and choose the vendor and the product that you want. The dark web sellers basically only ship through the U.S. Postal Service because it takes a warrant to open a package through the U.S. Postal Service versus UPS or FedEx. If it's in their system, they can open any package that's there. So they put a ton of research and time and effort into to make it as hard as possible for law enforcement to intercept their shipments. And then we talked a little bit about human trafficking. This is one single site. We collect about 60,000 forum posts a day related to human trafficking or child pornography a day. There are hundreds of millions of photos, videos, all kinds of horrible stuff that are traded every year in this environment. And it's exponentially growing. And unfortunately, in our client base, so federal law enforcement and the national security community, this is probably the least focused on topic. Everybody wants to talk about fentanyl. I talk about fentanyl almost on a weekly basis up in DC. Very few people ask about child exploitation, human trafficking, things like that. That unfortunately is not, it's not a huge priority in that community. So that mission falls on state and local law enforcement. I mean, you all are the ones that make a traffic stop and see something suspicious that could have a tie back to a larger operation that is coordinated through these dark web forums. But it is interesting from our perspective that this is not something we get a ton of questions about, although it is the vast majority of the data we collect on a daily basis. So that's a very high level. I just wanted to provide a quick overview of the threats associated in the dark web. We're a technology and a training company at heart. We do a lot of work internationally, a lot in DC, and we do a lot with Virginia and West Virginia law enforcement. I'd also like to point out that in a recent partnership with VCPI, we're going to hold a 3-day dark web exploitation and analysis course based in Richmond in November. I think there's details on, and then Linda can provide additional details as well. But I'm happy to take any questions. I didn't want to get too far into the technical side, although I'm happy to answer any technical dark web questions if you wish.
I'm Linda O'Connell of VCPI. One of the things that we do a lot at VCPI is we keep our ears open for what we do that all around the country. We travel around the country a lot doing all kinds of different courses. And we've had requests for years for dark web training. Sometimes when we get requests for training, we have to really look for just the right instructor. And sometimes we just stumble across them, which is what happened with Liam. It actually through a mutual friend of ours, we were connected, and when we learned about the work that he was doing, he's trying to provide these services and this sort of information to state and local law enforcement, we thought, you know what, a partnership with VCPI and Bluestone can really serve that purpose. I don't know if we have flyers here for the course that we're going to launch in November. So if you're interested in that, that would be great. But one of the things that I was thinking that we covered today, we have a couple more minutes.
Sure.
20 minutes. One of the things that I thought would be great is if you shared with them the challenges of law enforcement going into the dark web, how dark web works and how it's not geo-specific, and how to really use it in their investigative processes. I think that would be really helpful.
So one of the questions we always get from state and local law enforcement is who's operating on the dark web in my city or county, right? That's a valid question. The whole point of the dark web is to obscure the geographic location of the person using it. So it's, I would say the only city in Virginia that's going to have a lot of hits on the dark web is Charlottesville, and that's because of all the white nationalist activity in Charlottesville. And in the white nationalist community on the dark web, it is still talked about on a daily basis. So outside of Charlottesville, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of hits for Williamsburg or Newport News or anything like that. From a law enforcement perspective, the important thing to recognize about the dark web is that it's like Amazon. It doesn't matter where you are. You can still buy those goods from Amazon or the dark web and have it shipped to where you are. And there have been some extremely effective state and local law enforcement entities that have kind of used that, done a controlled buy, have somebody ship something to their location, and suddenly they have nexus to pursue a larger crime against that drug dealer or human trafficker or whatever. Fairfax County here is kind of one of the leaders in that, and through our FBI partners, we've heard that they've had a ton of great success. So it's important to recognize that if you're looking in the dark web, the chances of you finding Williamsburg or even Richmond or something like that is probably not that great, because the whole point is that you're not going to reveal your location. You're not saying, I'm selling drugs in Richmond, because you don't have to. You could be shipping from San Francisco and it'll end up in somebody's mailbox here. But you can use that to gain a better understanding of the network. We have a couple examples of traffic stops, there's drugs in the car, they end up doing a forensic investigation on the phone, they find the Tor app and a Bitcoin wallet on the phone. Well, then there's a lot more questions as you probably want to ask, because that individual could be part of a much larger network than simply, selling drugs locally. So there could be a lot of additional questions during the interrogation that you would want to ask. So little things, looking for those indicators that somebody might be plugged into a larger dark web network. Anytime you're dealing with any sort of CP investigation, you always want to look at the dark web nexus, because that's primarily where everybody's getting the images that they trade back and forth. And just the way that some of the dark web networks work, you can potentially tack on other charges. So instead of just having CP images on a computer, if they're plugged into a dark web network, there's a good chance that they're also transferring it, which is an additional charge. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of leverage understanding of the dark web to building a case on an individual. Any other questions? Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. I'll be around in the back if anybody has any technical questions that they didn't want to ask here. Thank you.
Liam, Linda, thank you all for being here today. We do appreciate the presentation. Very important, very valuable information for us. Sheriff Crawford, are you in the room?
Yeah, I think you
Is Jared Adams in the room? Is Jared Adams in the room? Well, I tell you what we've got. We've got about 15 minutes to stretch your legs, walk around a little bit, but don't leave. Come back into the room immediately at 4 o'clock, and we will start with our next speaker, which will be our last speaker of the day. So please give them respect to being here for the last session. So stretch your legs, move around a little bit.